Today, we're going to get started with the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza right now. This morning, two of the area's biggest hospitals have stopped functioning, according to the World Health Organization and the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, after being left without power or water. Israeli forces launched an assault on the Al-Shifa hospital over the weekend, claiming Hamas has a command center there. The IDF has not provided evidence to back up that claim, while hospital staff have denied the allegations. These pictures show at-risk newborn babies at the Al-Shifa hospital. A doctor inside told NBC News that they are among 36 babies in desperate need of care after being taken off of incubators due to a lack of power. He said 3 babies had already died over the weekend. Speaking yesterday, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told Face the Nation that the United States was pushing Israel to protect civilians.
The United States does not want to see firefights in hospitals where innocent people, patients receiving medical care, are caught in the crossfire. And we've had active consultations with the Israeli Defense Forces on this.
In a few moments, we'll hear from the spokesperson of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Alana Sinenko. But before that, let's get to NBC's Jay Gray. He is in Tel Aviv for us. Jay, good morning. So let's start out with the situation at Gaza's hospitals, what we just laid out there, including Al-Shifa, as we were discussing. Dire and perilous. That's the description from the World Health Organization. And that's, again, where those pictures of those babies are coming from. What is the latest there right now?
Yeah, and difficult to look at. What we can tell you is on the ground and from the air right now, there are reports that the fighting has intensified. Airstrikes as well as ground fighting near many of the hospitals in Gaza. And the WHO saying that Gaza's biggest and most technically advanced facility, Al-Shifa, right now, quoting here, is not functioning as a hospital anymore after days without power, without water, without basic medical supplies there to help some of the thousands who are there and injured. We know that there is, according to these doctors, constant gunfire and bombing in the region. The IDF has denied hitting Al-Shifa and has accused Hamas, as you talked about, of embedding key infrastructure in and around that hospital and others. They say they are going to continue to root out Hamas, whether it be near these hospitals or in the dense urban centers, that this fight's going to continue.
Jay, as we mentioned, medical staff inside, specifically about these babies really sounding the alarm. Is anything being done to try to evacuate them or the many others holed up inside? Obviously, the big question is, how does that even happen if they need the type of attention around the clock, if they need to be transported somewhere else, and is there anywhere safe to go? But that was big talk over the weekend, that there was sort of these corridors opened up to do so. But is that really even helping anything or a viable option?
Yeah, and here's the thing. We've seen a lot of people moving through those corridors, most of them walking by foot 4 and 5 miles at times. As for those babies taken out of those incubators, because as you talked about earlier, no power and no oxygen supply to help those children. Look, there are more than those 36 babies that need to leave. There are critical patients there that also need to leave. There have been ambulances in the area. The problem is many of the roadways out have been bombed. They're impassable by ambulances. We know the IDF has been communicating with some of the human rights organizations, trying to figure out a way to get some of these patients, including those babies, out. To this point, though, we've seen no indication that that's happened at all.
And Jay, all this is happening, though, as thousands of Palestinians either have already evacuated this area in the north of Gaza to head down south or continue to do so sparingly. But, the southern part of the Strip also has seen a lot of bombing as well. What is the situation in terms of finding somewhere safe right now within Gaza? And are the humanitarian pauses that have been happening here and there making any difference?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag, Savannah. Look, it's less intense fighting in the south, but I don't think anyone would say that it's safe by any means. We have seen tens of thousands daily walking through those corridors, getting to areas. But we know that there was some airstrikes yesterday near some of the camps that they are staying in, some of the shelters that are being used for those who have made the trip from the north. And we also know that during one of the humanitarian pauses for moving people through the corridors yesterday, that had to be stopped down while people were in the middle of that trip because of intense fighting as well. So it's certainly not even a safe passage at times for so many who are trying to get out of the north.
All right, Jay Gray, thank you for your continuing reporting from Tel Aviv for us. Yeah. Let's now bring in Alana Sinenko for more on what's happening inside Al-Shifa Hospital. Alana, good morning. So we just heard about life inside the hospital from Jay Gray. We've been seeing these images of these babies, but tell us, what are you hearing firsthand from Red Cross workers, and what type of care is even able to be provided at this point?
I speak every day with our own surgical team that is now based in one of the hospitals in Gaza, European hospital, which is in the southern part of Gaza, which is supposed to be a relatively quiet and safe area. But they also report that every night they spend several hours without sleep, which makes it extremely difficult to care for the patients the next day. And they're running out of the essential supplies, things like gauze and anesthetics, to treat these severe burns cases that they keep receiving every day. So this is the situation in the southern part, where things are better, and things in the north are much more dramatic. So when we speak about evacuating these hospitals, we also need to think which is the alternative facility which would have the capacity to receive and treat all these patients.
Yeah, as we continue to talk about those evacuations, we're actually also hearing that the International Committee of the Red Cross, your organization, has said that no one is leaving through these evacuation corridors as they are afraid to step outside of the hospital. Tell us about that. I mean, and even if you do make that decision to go ahead and try to evacuate, is the only option to walk from north to south? What is the transportation situation like? Walk us through the decisions that people even have available to them right now.
Our colleagues in Gaza are receiving calls every single day, calls from frantic civilians, people who are desperate, who say they're wounded, who say they're trapped, and ask to help them to evacuate. It is extremely frustrating and heartbreaking to be getting all these calls and not to be able to reach these people, because the security situation, even for our own teams, is extremely precarious. Last week, we went to Gaza City to deliver urgent medical supplies to hospitals. Our own medical convoy came under fire. And when we were on the way to the Gaza City, we saw thousands of people on the road walking, elderly, people in wheelchairs, women, young children. It is heartbreaking to watch, and civilians report that they just don't have the safe conditions and the necessary basic conditions to be able to evacuate. They walk for tens of kilometers past dead bodies without food and water. This is not the conditions under which people can live.
How concerned are you that this is going to get much worse? Can you imagine it getting much worse at this point, especially for people like those that are either receiving care or sheltering at these hospitals?
Looking at the images and hearing the reports, receiving these phone calls from people, it's just hard to imagine how worse it can get. But the situation is urgent and dire, because there's no food, there's no water, there's heavy military hostilities taking place in the densely populated areas. So it is a very desperate situation. I don't want to speculate, but we urgently need to make sure that these people can receive humanitarian supplies that they need.
Alana Sinenko, we appreciate you joining us again. We will continue to check in with you. We'd love to keep talking to you. Thank you very much. Well, the call for a ceasefire is intensifying, with protests popping up in dozens of cities across the world over the weekend. Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker sat down with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss the future of the war with Gaza, including a humanitarian pause on bombardment in the region.
Hello there, Joe and Savannah. This week on Meet the Press, I spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Here's what he had to say about the ongoing protests around the world calling for an end to civilian deaths in Gaza. French President Emmanuel Macron has said there is, quote, no justification for the ongoing bombing of civilians. All over the world, you've seen protesters who are calling for an end to civilian deaths in Gaza. Can you win this war without global support?
we will win this war because we have no other choice. There's no life for us. There's no future for us and our neighbors if we allow the axis of terror led by Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and their minions to dominate. We have an alliance for peace on the other side. It includes Israel, the United States, the moderate Arab states, and the rest of the civilized world. Now, it's a question, who wins? We have to win. There's confusion in many parts of the world. I have to say, not in the United States. I'm glad to see that the majority of the American people support Israel. They understand that we're fighting the just battle of civilization against barbarism. But those who protest for Hamas, you're protesting for sheer evil. There are a lot of misguided people out there who don't know the facts. You're talking to people who deliberately targeted civilians, who raped and murdered women, who beheaded men, who burnt babies alive, who kidnapped little babies and Holocaust survivors, you name it. These are the people that you are supporting. Now, you cannot, it's like in World War II, the Allies are fighting the Nazis, okay? Chancellor Kohl of Germany said that Hamas are the new Nazis. So imagine now, the Allies are fighting the Nazis. They've invaded France after they were attacked by the Nazis. They go into the cities of Germany. Obviously, the Nazis are fighting within civilian quarters, and civilians get killed. In fact, many of them were killed. Millions were killed. Now, who do you protest against? Do you protest against the Nazis, or do you protest against the Allies? And what these people are doing is protesting for sheer evil. That's wrong. By the way, it's a condemnation. It's an indictment of higher education in some of our universities.
You can see my full interview and a lot more at meetthepress.com. You can also get more Meet the Press here on NBC News Now every weekday at 4 p.m.
All right, Kristen Welker, thank you very much. Well, 5 U.S. service members were killed during a routine training exercise on Saturday after a military aircraft crashed into the Mediterranean Sea. According to officials, the incident happened during an air refueling mission. Well, out of respect for the families, the Department of Defense is withholding the identities of the crew members for 24 hours to notify their next of kin. An investigation into the crash is currently underway. Well, former President Trump's son, Donald Jr., is set to take the stand today for a second time in his father's civil fraud trial. The defense will make their case, trying to prove Mr. Trump and his family didn't intentionally take part in any wrongdoing. Prosecutors wrapped up their arguments last week after hearing from 25 witnesses, including the former president, as well as his sons Eric and Don Jr., and his daughter Ivanka. The New York Attorney General's office alleges that the Trump organization grossly inflated the value of company assets to the company's advantage. Former President Trump and his children deny those claims. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is here, along with NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos, for a closer look at this trial. Lucky me, you're both here on set with me. Good morning. Great to have you both with us. So, Vaughn, let's start with you and just what we can expect from today's proceedings and hearing potentially again from Don Jr.
Right. We're now almost 2 months into this case, and the prosecution rested its case this last Wednesday when Ivanka Trump took the stand. Now it's the defense calling up their witnesses. Don Jr. is coming back to the stand. He is going to face that questioning from his own defense lawyers and Donald Trump's defense team here. We heard from Don Jr.'s testimony the first go around, as well as his brother Eric Trump, an effort to distance himself from what was actually laid out in the financial records, which led to this lawsuit here, and making the case essentially that he was in the position of an executive, even the trustee at one point, and he was not looking at the exact minutia. Of course, there were some records which definitely questioned the extent to which the kids were actually aware here. But the defense is going to try to lay out here that in no way, shape, or form were they attempting to create financial fraud that would put them or the business in jeopardy.
Danny, as I mentioned a moment ago, we have heard from Don Jr. in this already. Former President Trump's lawyers didn't cross-examine him when they were called by the prosecution. Explain that strategy to now call him up again rather than having cross-examined him then, or in addition to having cross-examined him then.
When the plaintiff or a prosecutor calls a witness, they have the burden of proof. So if you're the defense, you wait and see what they say. Typically, you can only ask questions on cross-examination about issues that came up on direct examination. So the defense appears to be thinking, and this is mostly because they didn't cross-examine him at all, that whatever information they wanted to get from him, they figured, we'll just leave that for direct, because at the end of the government's case, we want to move for a directed verdict. We want to limit their testimony, control it, and then when we get into our phase of the case, we'll get into some of the other things that maybe we think the state didn't ask about in their case in chief on direct examination.
Got it. Vaughn, who else are we going to hear from? Who else is on the defense's list of witnesses?
Well, the defense, as of the end of September, turned over to the judge a list of 127 potential witnesses. Now, the reality here is we don't expect all of those individuals to take the stand. The defense has already said that they intend to have their case wrapped up by December 15th. So again, we're looking at about a month through this process here, but we could see Eric Trump. We could see Donald Trump take the stand again. The chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg. There was a key financial executive at Trump Organization who testified under oath in response to the prosecution's questions that Donald Trump had told Alan Weisselberg that he wanted to inflate the value of their properties. We could very well see the defense come back at him looking for some specifics on that account.
Before I let you both go, Dan, if you don't mind, if we switch gears to Trump's election interference case, that is set to start in March. That he's denied any wrongdoing there as well. But last week, actually, his attorneys filed a motion asking the judge to allow the trial to be televised. What do you think is behind that request? Why would he want that? And how common is something like that?
Here's why he would want it. He wants to try his case to his jury, which is the media. Part two is, will it happen? Zero chance. And here's why. There is a federal rule that absolutely prohibits cameras in criminal courtrooms. This is not a case where the judge can say, boy, normally I say no, but in this case, it sure is of public interest. No, absolutely not. Maybe in state court, depending on the state and depending on the rule. But in federal court, the rules are crystal clear. They absolutely prohibit cameras in criminal courtrooms. The only person who can change that is either the Supreme Court, maybe Congress, but certainly not a district court judge.
All right, there you go. Danny Savelos and Vaughn Hilliard, fresh off just getting married. Congratulations. Great to see you. Thank you both. Now to Capitol Hill, where House Republicans are trying to sell their plan to avoid a government shutdown. Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled the plan for a two-step continuing resolution, as it's called, over the weekend. Under the plan, several spending bills needed to keep the government open would be extended until January 19th, as you see on your screen, while the remaining bills would go on a continuing resolution until February. But with the Friday night deadline fast approaching, it's unknown whether Johnson can get enough votes to pass the bill in the House and the Democratic-controlled Senate in time to avoid a shutdown. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us on this now. Hey, Ali, good morning. So how does this work? Walk us through these extensions, those dates, and also, is there any chance this is going to happen? Are the votes there?
It seems like they're probably there, but of course, you never know for sure until the gavel drops in the House chamber. We expect that vote to come as early as Tuesday as lawmakers head back to town. We saw Speaker Johnson release this plan over the weekend, trying to give his members 72 hours to read in on what he's proposing. But you're right. They're calling this a laddered continuing resolution. It's kind of more like a step stool, though, because there's really only two tiers to it. There's that January date that you point out, and then there's that later February date that you also mentioned. This is basically to allow two things. The first is so that Johnson can say that he's not just doing a clean continuing resolution, which is how Speaker Johnson became Speaker Johnson in the first place. That's what Kevin McCarthy did just a few months ago with the help of Democrats to avoid the last government shutdown and get us to this current position. Johnson doesn't want to be in that same position, and so he's still pushing against the same budget hawks, the same people who want steep spending cuts within his conference. So he's trying to show that he can do something different while also not shutting down the government before holiday break. No one likes that, especially not lawmakers who'd like to be home with their families just like everyone else, but then also allowing it so that the Senate can't come in and, in his words, jam House Republicans into a deal that they don't want. This is a time-buying measure, and it's also something a little different than what McCarthy did. Hopefully that keeps Johnson out of hot water with his rightmost flank. We'll see.
You mentioned jamming Democrats into something they don't want. How are they responding generally? Same with the White House to this.
Look, they're not happy, but they're not so unhappy. And I think that that's really important here. House Democrats have not been quick to knock this plan down. And I think that means that this is something that they could potentially get behind on the floor. That's something they're going to need, because there are those same budget hawks within the House Republican flank who would like to see steeper spending cuts, who do not want to get behind this. So you got to replace those votes somewhere. That's likely to come from the Democratic side. You got to watch watch how many Democrats, though, in the House actually come behind this. If it's too many, that could trigger the motion to vacate. We've been here before. I don't even want to get into it because it seems like we just got into this once before. But here we are. And on the Senate side, we're going to watch them move a vehicle to pass whatever it takes to avoid a government shutdown sometime tonight. But it seems like this could be something that they get behind, even just to buy themselves time to do this battle, not now, but early next year instead.
I'm trying to think of something I'm going to describe to my husband as well. I'm not happy, but I'm not so unhappy, because it's hilarious that that's the state of things.
There's a difference.
Right now, there is a difference, and it's just like, so it's just craziness. Allie, let's switch gears really quickly to some 2024 election headlines while I have you. You are known on Instagram for making your list of people, crossing them out as they drop out. Well, Senator Tim Scott announced last night that he's suspending his presidential campaign, and it seemed like it came as a shock to Republicans, including some of his own staff. What do we know about this?
It definitely came as a shock to some of his own staff. This is something that, to the extent that it was known Scott was going to drop out late last night on a Fox News program, he didn't really tell staff ahead of time. And it's not clear that he's spoken to all of his staff since dropping out. You got to remember, there's people who pick up their lives and move to Charleston, South Carolina, move to Iowa, move to New Hampshire, all in the name of making someone president. So there's definitely a lot of hurt feelings that they were not at least spoken to about this decision. Nevertheless, Scott is someone who stumbled in debates, was never able to gain traction in those all-important early states, and announced last night on Fox News that he would be leaving the race. So yes, I get to go back to work and cross off another name from my primary Republican list. You guys can all watch that, of course, on Instagram. But I think that this is not necessarily shocking, given the fact that Scott had been struggling, even just in the last few weeks. Savannah, he had told his staff, or rather his senior staff had told his staff, that they were going to be going all in on Iowa, shifting all of their campaign resources there. One of the super PACs that had been backing him pulled down all of their ads off the air a few weeks ago. Clearly, they had abandoned him. This makes sense, but it was surprising in the way that it happened.
Absolutely. All right, Ali Vitale, thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.